So e-bike bans. This one sucks. I really use language like that so much on my channel. But so it's been about a year since I did one of these videos, but I wanted to make a video about trends in the e-bike industry. I usually do one about every year, and I think that they're pretty helpful. There's a lot going on. I'm interested to know also like what you guys think, so certainly encourage you to follow up in the comments and stuff. And although I'm not always able to respond to those comments, I definitely encourage them, and I read pretty much all of them. The industry overall has been going through a lot of changes, coming off of this like big bike boom during COVID, where kind of slowing down a little bit. I mean, there's still a lot of progress in a lot of areas. We're seeing continued growth in ridership and that sort of thing, but the overall sales side of things, I think it's not as strong as it was during COVID. And that's okay, and that's to be expected. We're seeing a lot of over inventory, so there's a lot of brands and shops and that sort of thing that they have sales going on. We have a lot of sales going on. So a little plug for us, my shop Propel, that's who kind of helps put on these videos and everything like that. But basically we have a couple of different shops, and try not to ask too much of you guys, but if you are interested or you know somebody that might be interested, ask them to check us out. Reach out to us. If you don't see what you're looking for, we might have it, might not be up on our site or whatever, but check out our site and we'd really appreciate it. But getting back into the trends thing, so overall I think that this is in a lot of ways pointing to this kind of systemic issue that exists in the bike industry and the way that we produce things. And it's great that we have a global supply chain, but it creates a lot of challenges because you have to kind of make these like bets or predictions well in advance to potentially meet market demands. If your bet, as I like to call it, is off, you can end up with a lot more inventory than you'd expect. Even the best minds in the industry get this wrong from time to time, and most of them might have got it wrong or might have just not really had the controls they might like to have in place to manage this. But we're in this now, and I think this past year seems to be this like real focus on like trying to sell the existing inventory. I think that might also be something that we start to consider overall in the future of, do we need to be continuing to push the envelope in more and more tech and this and that. I would like to see us kind of like stick with things for a longer period, allow those things to get to scale and different things like that. But there's definitely pressures from competition, and many of these companies might recognize this issue coming. It's not so easy to go to your factory and say, you know, just stop that, don't deliver this, when you already kind of have all the parts, you have all these things running in place. But I think that there'll be less and less over the next year. So overall, that might also change the way that manufacturing happens and the way that we think of supply chains and things like that. So that's something that we're also starting to see a little bit. But again, that's also a challenging thing to make shifts around. I mean, this concept of just-in-time inventory, it worked great before COVID. But during COVID, that creates a lot of challenges if you don't have full control over your supply chain, or if you don't have a diverse supply chain. I'm really looking to get more involved in that side of things and really interested in that. There's a big need in the industry. It's a lot of the challenges that we're faced with today can be kind of traced back to that. So for me, as someone that believes in the future of the industry, I'm always looking for opportunities to help to shape the future of that and make it more sustainable and help it to really grow, because I really believe in the future of this. In the spirit of manufacturing, we're also seeing auto manufacturers get more involved. Our last trends video was talking about Porsche purchasing this company called Volkswagen, which is a growing e-bike motor manufacturer, and they also had purchased a brand called Grape. It seems like they're going even harder now. They recently decided to discontinue the brand Grape and focus on the Porsche brand, which I think makes sense, but I think a lot of people were maybe surprised about that. We're seeing a lot of manufacturing kind of come up in Europe. I think that's for a variety of different reasons, but one of the main ones, there's a lot of tariffs, and on the back of this, supply chain challenges. I think we're seeing a lot of companies try to have more control over their supply chain, and if they could localize it in Europe, it can help with that. We're not seeing that much movement here yet in the US. Certainly seeing that in other sectors like the electric vehicle sector and some of that sort of thing, but not as much here, but we'll see. On the topic of automakers entering this space, Volkswagen has been getting more involved. They've been kind of loosely involved through Pon, who recently became one of the biggest manufacturers in the world through their acquisition of Cycling Sports Group. They actually have one of the largest portfolio of brands, making them the largest manufacturer overall. And Pon is really notable for being the distributor of Volkswagen in the Netherlands. And so there's kind of this like group of Volkswagen, Porsche, which is owned by Volkswagen. They're all kind of doing these interesting things in the e-bike space. So, and maybe some of the things that they're doing, I would suspect is going to be a trend that we see others following as well. So Volkswagen is now entering the space offering leasing. So obviously they have a lot of experience with that around automobiles. And so they're basically bringing that to the e-bike space, which I think will be really great. We're also seeing these like short-term leases or long-term rentals, I guess you can say. We've been seeing this outside of the US, but just this past year, we've seen a lot of companies pop up here offering like a 1 month rental, a 6 month rental, these sort of things. And I suspect that we'll continue to see that grow as it just lowers that barrier to entry for consumers to potentially enter the market. Although it's growing in popularity, it's still an unfamiliar thing. The infrastructure is not all the way there. So it can be difficult for people to make that big leap and make a purchase. But perhaps if you could have a rental option or that sort of thing, it might be a little easier to jump in. I'm also seeing e-bike share continuing to grow, including some kind of new and different models. Something I've seen for a couple years now, but it seems to be growing in popularity recently, e-bike libraries. The concept basically is that you can take a bike out of the e-bike library like you would a book for a period of 1 month or 2 months or whatever the case may be. And usually this is subsidized by the city or some other nonprofit organization for free or very low cost. We're seeing this pop up in different places, and there's this theory that this might be more sustainable than some of the more traditional share models, which can be really challenging, especially when it comes down to maintenance. Because there's not this sense of ownership, it creates a different dynamic with the user that maybe they don't take care of the product in the same way. So I guess that's part of the theory, that if you have this library, potentially get people to engage with it more, and if people can use it more in their daily life at a very low risk, I mean, it's free pretty much. The theory is that people will adopt it more afterwards, and that's what the data is starting to show, that after people have a bike from the library for a period of a month or 2 months, that generally at the end of that, there's a high probability that they're actually going to purchase one for themselves. So what that also tells me is that cities want to encourage this. I mean, cities are putting in more and more bike infrastructure. Cities have goals around lowering their carbon emissions, just improving the mobility of the people in their cities and improving access to commerce and different things like that. One of the challenges, if you want to get people to change modes, it can be challenging if there's not this like critical mass of people doing it. So this seems to be just another tool in their toolkit to potentially encourage people to ride e-bikes. Another one comes up all the time is rebates. I'm here in the US. I know there's been rebates all over the world. I'm going to cover mostly the US right now. People keep on asking about the rebate in the US. I don't think it's happening anytime soon. And there's a couple of reasons why. One, there's a lot of challenges in the federal government right now, including the fact that it was about to shut down and just got extended for 45 days. And there's just challenges moving things through there. And I'm going to try not to get into the politics of things too much right now, but people have a lot of trouble with this idea that electric cars have rebates, but electric bikes don't have rebates. And one of the things that's different about electric cars that probably people don't necessarily look at so much is that the electric car rebate, there's one stipulation that is particularly different here, and it's that the electric car needs to be assembled in the US. Now, at the moment, there's very little to no electric bike assembly happening in the US, and as such, if the government was to give this rebate, they might not necessarily benefit in the same way that they would by giving a rebate to electric cars. If they give a rebate to electric cars, they're basically creating jobs and keeping that money in the U.S. economy. Where if you give a rebate to electric bike, in theory, that money's not really staying here. So I suspect that this is one of the main reasons. I'm looking forward to talking to more parties on this, talking to some that seem to be well informed on this topic, and I seem to agree that this is likely the challenge that we're faced with. So will we see more electric bike assembly in the U.S., electric bike manufacturing and that sort of thing? I suspect over time a lot of these trends are kind of pushing in that direction, but it's going to be a big undertaking to make that happen. But although we're not seeing electric bike rebates on the federal level, we're definitely seeing more and more of them on the state and city level, and I suspect that will continue. One thing we're starting to see more and more interest in is regulation. One of the most notable things that happened this year was New York City actually implemented a law to require UL on batteries. Interestingly enough, I was watching my trends video from last year that we recorded in summer of 2022, and I was stating that we're likely going to see the government start to require these things, and sure enough, it was a couple months later that a bill was introduced, and about 6 months later it was actually passed. So I know some people are not too happy about this. Don't blame me. I didn't even talk to anybody. I mean, maybe I talked to them through this video, but I think this needs to happen. I really wonder what you guys' thoughts are on this. Like, is there some other logical way around this? I don't think that there is. As of September 16th, which is 6 months after the bill was actually passed, in New York City, it's illegal to sell a bike that's not tested to the UL standards of 2271 or 2849. You can't sell it as a retailer in New York City, and you can't deliver into New York City. And they've already been pretty aggressive about going after retailers and online sellers and that sort of thing. So I suspect that will continue. And New York is really pushing hard on implementing a federal requirement as well. There's a bill that's been introduced to make a similar requirement on the federal level, or basically require CPSC, Consumer Product Safety Commission, to update their regulations and require this. There was a big meeting the end of July, 3.5 hours. I watched the whole thing. It was very interesting to see the whole industry basically saying, CPSC, please make this a requirement. It's kind of a rare thing to see the industry act in such a unified way, but it's clear, to me at least, that this is one of the bigger threats to the industry overall. This will change the landscape quite a bit of the different manufacturers and brands involved in this space, because if you can't produce a safe product, then it's going to be increasingly more difficult to sell that product, and it might be difficult, nearly impossible, to actually import that product. And considering 97% of the products are actually imported today, that likely is the main method that the government will want to use in order to filter out products that are potentially unsafe or not tested to an independent third-party standard. Another thing that's coming up is tariffs. The de minimis rule really comes into play here as well, and this is something that the government is looking at overall. Historically, the number was a lot lower, but right now it's $800. Comparatively, Europe, it's 150 euros, which is pretty close to the US dollar right now, but it's a big gap. A lot of the really cheap e-bikes and stuff like that are able to be imported without even being checked by customs at all. And so this is a big topic that's coming up. A lot of different legislators are talking about this, thinking about this, and there's currently some legislation in place around this. So I suspect in not too distant future, this will likely be adjusted, at the very least, just as it relates to micromobility, things with batteries, things that have potential hazard. And the idea is that if you can lower that, then you could at least have customs check these products as they come in to see, do they have these safety requirements, and then potentially have these other requirements that might come to play. I suspect that we're also likely going to see tariffs come back online. Currently, there's an exemption on tariffs for bikes and e-bikes and that sort of thing. And the exemption basically expires every so often. It was set to expire in September, And the Biden administration decided to re-extend that to the end of December. Really, at this point, they could just make the choice not to extend that. I don't know if that's going to happen. It would be a pretty dramatic move, and I think everybody's like scared to make those moves right now, even if they might be the right moves. I don't know. And yeah, so there's a lot of these like moves happening in the government that likely will make some pretty big shifts in this industry. You know, if we were to see that come online, I suspect that would make a pretty big change. So e-bike bans. This one sucks, really. Really use language like that so much on my channel, but like dealing with too much inventory, dealing with some of these other challenges that we're faced with today, it's like, this is rough. But a lot of buildings now are saying no e-bikes allowed, or buses or transit systems are just saying no e-bikes allowed. Changes the accessibility of this tool for many, and I'm not really sure what the way out is exactly. Like, my suggestion right now is for buildings to consider not banning, but making a requirement that the product meets the current fire code, or at least this is in New York City. A lot of other places, they haven't really adopted this fire code. That's another thing. I suspect that eventually more cities will basically adopt a fire code that's similar to New York City, as that's quite often how these things happen, how standards get implemented. But People for Bikes actually introduced some really good language on this, and I'll link to that. But basically, it's a challenge to walk these things back. I think that's what I had been talking about for several years, and my concerns about safety and that sort of thing, because I've been there. I mean, in New York City, e-bikes were illegal for a long time, and there was a lot of efforts to really shut them down, and there's new efforts to kind of shut them down, or like require registration and licensing. But you know, speaking on the ban thing, these are private businesses. These are individuals. It's not governments. It's they can act how they want to act. If your apartment building wants to say that e-bikes are not allowed, I'm not a lawyer. I mean, I'd be interested to know what you guys think on this, if you have more details on this. But I do believe that they're in their rights to do that. And one of the bigger challenges, actually going to a big conference in 2 days on this, is the insurance companies. So the insurance companies are starting to say no e-bikes. I mean, this has always been a challenge for us as an e-bike shop, that a lot of insurance companies would say, we don't insure e-bike shops. And I think until we have this like more universal standard, the safety improves, it's a more predictable risk, it's difficult for them, and I get it. Maybe natural of like an early industry of what we're dealing with. I'm sure it was a similar thing, like when, you know, the early days of the automobile. This is early industry, and this is what we gotta work with. It's, as my dad says, it's a marathon, not a sprint. If I'm to look at the big picture right now, I'd say we're in mile 4 or something like that out of 26. I don't know. I wonder what you guys think. What mile are we in out of 26 if this is a marathon? I don't mean to be a downer on this video. I hope I'm not feeling that way. I just want to give you guys the news, my perspective, what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing, that sort of stuff. Another trend we're seeing is more like mergers, acquisitions, companies closing, different things like that. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of new entrants into the market. We've seen a lot of rapid growth. We're also seeing more recently some of that come to an end. One of the most notable things that happened in this past year was VanMoof declared bankruptcy, and they were noted as the most funded e-bike company in the industry, and there was all these people celebrating them and this and that, and looking at them as like the holy grail of e-bikes. But it seemed like they had a lot of other challenges in their operations overall. They had to declare bankruptcy, and ultimately they were purchased, actually interestingly enough, by another company that's kind of related to car company. McLaren is this company called Lavoie that makes scooters, and basically they purchased VanMoof out of bankruptcy. There's going to be a lot of these sort of things happening. This past year and the next year is going to continue to be pretty challenging for a lot of companies, so I suspect that a lot of them will end up closing. I've seen some other friends' companies end up closing and different things like that, so I suspect that we'll see more of that, unfortunately, but I think that's just natural for, you know, an early industry as it's evolving. evolving and that sort of thing. So that being said, we're seeing a lot of acquisitions and just bike shops overall, not really e-bike specific, but just overall seeing a lot of bike shops being bought up by Trek, Specialized, Pond. It does seem like that's kind of on hold right now as everybody's trying to like reorganize and like get their things right as things are a little bit tighter right now. But I suspect that stuff will continue again as the market improves. So I know I spoke about a lot of like macro trends, I guess you can say. I wanted to focus a little bit more on the micro stuff, just on product stuff. And it's really all the same. I mean, we're seeing lighter weight e-bikes come online. It's definitely becoming a popular thing. I think we're starting to grapple with the realities of the materials, and you can only go so far with making a battery smaller, a motor smaller, without losing all its power or range. More brands are offering throttle e-bikes in the US. We see brands that maybe would have suspected would not have went that way. You know, Specialized introduced some bikes with a throttle. Trek has some bikes with a throttle with their new Electra bike. It's definitely something that we're keeping an eye on. I mean, at the moment we just work with Bosch, but I think the industry is really showing that the consumer is looking for that. I mean, I have kind of mixed feelings on this. I think that if you have the experience, if you ride a bike with really good pedal assist, you probably don't necessarily feel like you want a throttle. The average person might feel like that's just easier. I don't want to think about shifting. I don't want to think about all these like special things. I just want to like get on the bike and get help when I want it and just push that throttle. I respect that. I think that that's something that, you know, we really need to look at as well, because at the moment we don't offer any products with a throttle. Beyond that, just more and more integration of technology, over-the-air updates, GPS tracking, all these sort of things. We covered a lot of stuff with Bosch earlier this year. They announced that they're finally bringing ABS to the US. Big thing. You're not really seeing that with much other companies, but ABS braking is kind of a big thing. We're starting to see this trend again, this integration of motor and drivetrain together. I'm really hopeful for this concept. I'm just concerned about the longevity of it, because if you were to have one of these systems that has the motor and the drivetrain together, you're really dependent on that thing working and being supported long term, because it's a pretty big investment in that one unit. So you really have to put a lot of trust in that company that they're going to be able to support it long term. I'm hoping that we're seeing more of these bigger players get into that space, but I think that there's a lot of pressure to move in that direction. We did see Continental release a system like that a couple of years ago, and then they had to pull it from the market, unfortunately. But I wonder if some of these other companies like Pinion might be more successful with it. They seem to have been developing this thing for quite some time, and they've had a decent amount of success with just their center-mounted drivetrain. So I'm hopeful on that, and it seems like we're going to start seeing that, and we'll see how it plays out. Cargo bikes are continuing to grow in popularity, especially larger cargo bikes, and I suspect that will continue to grow as well. Actually, New York City is redefining some of their rules around that, actually allowing larger cargo bikes and even four-wheel cargo bikes. So I suspect that other cities might follow this trend as well, as they look to remove carbon-emitting vehicles from the urban city centers, especially cargo bikes that could potentially replace a van in a one-to-one relationship. That's going to be an interesting trend to follow. I suspect that we'll see more of that. You know, for now, most of what we're doing with cargo bikes is for families, and that's continuing to grow, but we're seeing more like solopreneurs and even larger businesses get into this. You know, Whole Foods, Amazon, FedEx, UPS, all these guys are starting to do this sort of stuff as well. We're also seeing a growing trend in more and more charging infrastructure, and that seems to be a growing interest, especially around some of these places where fires is a big concern. New York City actually got $25 million from the federal government, and they're putting up $25 million to create, I think, about 300 charging stations at public housing throughout New York City. We're also seeing companies like Uni that are adding charging infrastructure to some of their bike parking units. One of the biggest deterrents for people using bikes for transportation is the concerns around theft. So if we can solve that concern around parking, and we could also solve the charging thing at the same time, that's a big problem that exists, and something that we're seeing a lot of different people and companies kind of throw their hat in the ring to try to solve it. We'll see more of these charging stations and other types of solutions introduced around that idea. E-bike accessories. So we're seeing more and more products just developed around this ecosystem that's growing here. More e-bike helmets, lights, different clothing for e-bike riders. I think that we're going to continue to see that grow as there continues to be a larger addressable market. I think you can build more things on top of that ecosystem. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed thinking through these ideas, and I always enjoy the feedback that you guys provide on these types of videos as I think to the future of this industry and how we're going to play a part and how we're going to potentially work with others in that regard. So I encourage you to, leave your comments. Tell us, what trends are you seeing? Or am I wrong in some of these trends? Is it going to totally shift? I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely open to these dissenting perspectives. But I think that that's about it. As I said, we'd really appreciate it if you support us. If you're looking to buy an e-bike or you know somebody that is, tell us to check us out, propelbikes.com. We have a couple of locations. We're in New York, Delaware, and California. We also ship throughout the country, and we'd love to help you. But I think that's about it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in a future one. All right, take care.